Welcome to On the Edge with Deneen and Barry. Today we are in Vegas at the AICPA ENGAGE conference with Barry Melancon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Deneen. It's always great to be with you.
He's the president and CEO of the AICPA, so sneaking you away is really greatly appreciated. I've been coming to this conference for 13 years, and I have listened to you speak and the other keynoters speak about the profession. But what I'd love to drill down on is the theme this year, which is adapt and thrive. So when you think from a technology perspective, I'd love to kind of talk about how we are seeing firms embrace all the new technologies. There's so much innovation coming at firms, and there's so much opportunity. So I'd love for you to kind of share your thinking on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the adapt and thrive, I think just to be fair, before we start with the technology part, we have to put it in the context of adapting and thriving in this world that we're in, right? Which obviously has a huge technology component associated with it, but there's some other things going on too, right? You know, COVID, there's geopolitical issues that is going on, you know, there's different economic outcomes. And I think, you know, the first premise is that the profession is very well positioned, whether it's, you know, small firms, mid firms, large firms, members who work in business and industry in the corporate world. The profession did a remarkable job during COVID, and historically has done remarkable jobs with the ebbs and flows of the economy. What's different, though, is the premise of your question, and what's different is technology is speeding up really fast. The evolution of what firms can do, what they're expected to do, the expectations of clients certainly are evolving. And there'll be pockets in a firm's clientele where those expectations aren't there, but basically the world is moving very quickly. And what I like to say is that technology is that huge enabler, but it's also the accelerator. I mean, it just really makes things happen much more at a speed of light, much more greatly. So what I think that you know, the premise is what technologies, and the reality is that there's a whole set of technologies. Clearly, data analytics, which can be derived from a lot of different platform technologies. The profession has always had its hands on a lot of data.
Right.
It's just how you handle that data. You know, CPAs are trusted with data of their clients, unlike anybody else, right? So that data set was always there, but it was, you know, 30 and 40 years ago, it was manual, and then, you know, 25 years ago, it was spreadsheets, and now it's in modern technologies like AI, like robotics, like other tools that are out there from a technological perspective. And so I think that, you know, you can even say, you know, blockchain plays a role in that because of the authentic nature of certain data sets, et cetera. And what I would say is that if you grew up in the profession and did audits in the 80s, in a smaller firm, not talking about public company auditing here, what people who grew up in the profession doing was what can we take from that process about that business and help them be better? You know, it was the entrepreneurial client that you were doing an audit for a bank loan or whatever. Well, now technology is an enabler to put your hands on so much more data, and that you can build the relationship understanding of that data to drive better decision making. And I think that's really what it is. It isn't about the data. I mean, it isn't about the technology. It's about technologies that are applied. And yes, it can be daunting as to which one. And there are companies that, obviously many companies that are out there providing different capabilities. And, you know, there'll be winners and losers in that space, and there'll be rationalization of that space. And it's manifesting itself in even what we talk about. We're reinventing the audit because of the methodology of the audit, because of the technology capabilities. We've said, if you never had an audit and you knew the technologies that are out there today, how would you design an audit? And that's our dynamic audit solution. And you can take each pocket of the profession, including how the CPA exam is going to be structured, that is about that evolution that's occurred.
Well, and through that evolution, I think, you know, change is hard. It's hard for all of us. And firms have been so successful and so profitable that sometimes, and I think you said earlier in the town hall that firms are great with change. So I think there's a perception that they're not, which they are. They are evolving, but it's that they've been so successful at how they've done it in so long. How are they taking advantage of this great enabler? What are you seeing them do well and maybe not so well?
We had a speaker at one of our AICPA council meetings probably a decade ago. He was the CFO of British Telecom who had gone through very significant trouble. And he was asked this question because they went through this massive change, including re-engineering. Now, this is a big company, but re-engineering. And the question was asked, well, how did you get people really on board to make that change? He said, well, you know, it was actually pretty easy. Our stock was selling at $1 a share, and we were on the brink of bankruptcy. In that environment, to create change is very easy. What you just described, though, is the reality is that firms are very successful. Professional services in general, but specifically CPA firms. They're trusted professionals. The world doesn't have trust. People relying on us. We did a marvelous job helping particularly small business through the COVID environment. And so you're going to have pockets in almost any firm, some more than others, that are just, I'm doing fine. I can't handle anymore. I'm doing everything I can possibly do. So don't talk to me about this change. But what leaders have to do is they have to build an environment that embraces change for tomorrow, right? And how you get from here to tomorrow. And that's a lot about motivation. That's a lot about, you know, selling the reason why. And there are a lot of books written on how you manage change, but it is harder coming from a successful part. And then there's, and I did say this, you talked about a town hall. The reality is, if you look at a firm 20 years ago versus today, it doesn't look anything like it did 20 years ago, right? And so it's not that things don't change or haven't changed in the profession. They've changed tremendously. It's the iterative. It's how fast it's changing today that is much different, and that can be daunting. And it takes skilled leadership to make that work in any size.
Well, and something else you mentioned in the town hall is that you just said over the last 20 years, firms look differently, but in the next 4 years, firms are going to look differently because of the speed of the technology. So, I mean, if you think about fast forward 4 years, what do you envision that looking like for firms?
Well, we speak a lot about business models, and business models relates to how you do services, who you do services with, which is a staffing model, how you bill those services, how you charge for those services, how are they viewed as from a value perspective. And I mentioned that the audit, you know, we're trying to change the value equation, particularly on private company audits, back to maybe what had some roots in the 80s as to what people look for in there. But, you know, I think that the fundamental issue, I mean, human capital is a big challenge in the world today, although with inflation on the rise and with interest rates going up, that could moderate to some degree. But it's how do you look at your go-to-business strategy as a firm? And every firm's strategy is different. They're in different places. They have different clientele. And, you know, what is your pricing? How do you service it? And ultimately, what does your firm even look like from a leverage and skill set perspective? I talk about what I call fat middle firms, as opposed to the traditional pyramid shape of a firm has been with us since really basically the 1940s. And really, a name you'll recognize, a gentleman named Arthur Anderson, who was the founder of Arthur Anderson, you know, preached to the profession back then that the manufacturing model need to be embraced. Manufacturing is a pyramid shaped model. And, you know, a typical CPA firm looks a lot different than a typical law firm, as an example, shape. But what I think people are seeing is if you think of the traditional pyramid, the two corners, you know, some of that's happening in all size firms with outsourcing and offshoring and things of that nature. But clearly technology is sitting in both places because it's an enabler of offshoring. And technology is changing some of the entry level. So we have this war for talent, the entry level, but the real notion of where firms are going is that middle, that fatter middle. And so just to give you an example, we believe that there's going to be a much greater movement from business and industry back into public practice. So for 100 years, people went to public practice and they went to corporate, right? There will be some movement back, and we're seeing it. And that's because what a firm does is it takes a skill set or a knowledge base and it applies to generally multiple clients in that same vertical, let's call it. And so how you function in that vertical is a concept of what's the skill sets in business acumen. So if I'm, let's just say I have healthcare clients, a person who's running healthcare comes in, can service 10, 12, 15 clients in healthcare, and bring to it a perspective that's much harder to grow in my firm from the bottom up, or any firm. And so I think that mix, that movement, I hate to say it's like sheep. I mean, sheep are moving all different directions at the same time. It's not sheep, the euphemism of sheep. It's more the how do herds of sheep move. And I think competencies in the profession are going to move in both directions, and in different ways, up, down, sideways, to get the skill set to match the business model.
I agree. And I've been saying, especially because I focus on CAS, that's my passion. I've been helping firms build a CAS practice for 15 years. And as firms evolve, and the CAS 2.0 is a big deal, and a big thinking and big messaging that you're sharing with firms. Firms are on to that, past the 1.0 and moving into more of that advisory. If you want to build out that CAS practice, vertical focus is huge, and bringing in that talent that knows how to be a controller or CFO to that vertical is a game changer for firms. Bring that talent in the firm. That's how you upskill the rest of the firm to really be able to be predictive and look at the data in a meaningful way.
Right. And make good decisions. And so that's very right. And it's not that technology displaces the profession. It's technology enables the profession to move up back into that middle, right? Because what you're doing is how do I take the learnings or the information together, the data, and then make it more valuable to a client, or if I'm doing it in corporate, and make it more valuable to my company. And so that's the real element of this, and it allows you to move up. It really does allow. And look, if technology is going to displace this profession, it happened already. It's not going to happen. It's a technology human stack that really creates the different values.
So I've had conversations with managing partners of firms about moving Botkeeper, and they're like, well, we use Botkeeper, we have to get rid of all the bookkeepers. And I'm like, no. When you gave them a computer, did you get rid of them? When you gave them email, did you get rid of them? Like, you're giving them more tools, and you give them cell phones. You're just giving them more tools. It's shifting the way they work, but I think it's exciting, the new way to really collaborate with your client. And I agree 100%. It's I like the word, I'm going to use your word, it's an enabler, enabling them to touch more clients in this newer, different way. But there's still this fear of change, or fear that technology is replacing us. And so, which I think is understandable, but it's not. I like what you said, right? Like 100 years ago, it's not, depression's not going anywhere. But how do you paint that vision for firms in a way that's exciting and not scary or not overwhelming?
The amount of opportunities is phenomenal. And so I go back to the business model, and it's where can I make a difference with a client, that affects who my clients are, what, we do sessions here at Engage about how to fire clients and things of that nature. And that's not necessarily, what we're preaching, but the notion is what you do for a client ought to be creating value for that client. The businesses today have this multi-set of stakeholders, employees in the smallest environment of a company or small company. But as a company gets bigger, all sorts of stakeholders with different things. ESG is coming into that environment as well. And so the CPA firm has to look at it and say, where am I providing value that can really reward my people at a higher level, because I can earn the revenue to do that because I'm creating that value. And not every client will fit that. Not every client, just like every CPA firm doesn't want to move into something new, not every business wants to move into something new. That's the vast majority of it. It's just funny, you talked about technology. Any CPA who's 60 or older, the first thing they did when they went into a CPA firm is they had a 13-column spreadsheet and they did manual calculations of depreciation. Well, by the time they were a second or third year person in the firm, all of that was out the window, because we had rudimentary spreadsheets, and even, really rudimentary spreadsheets or mini computers that could calculate depreciation. But those jobs didn't go away. And it's just that personified in a bunch of different ways going forward.
Well, I'm watching the time. I would love for you to leave us with, I know that tomorrow is the keynote, right? Some key concepts of your keynote tomorrow that you want firms to really take back to their team and focus on.
Well, I think the first thing is that everybody in this profession, no matter where you work, ought to be incredibly proud of the profession. And that the work we've done in COVID, the work we've done in difficult times, it has been remarkable. And, you know, young people in firms today are purpose-driven. That is a huge purpose to sell. I like to say, you know, when the history of COVID is written, there probably won't be a chapter on the profession's contribution, what they ought to be, because in a lot of ways on the economic side, you know, we were the first responders. Yes, the medical profession was critical, but in a different way, the medical profession for business was that. So let's start there. The second point is that the world is changing from an expectation standpoint, and I'm clearly going to talk about that. And it's easy to say, I'm just going to do the financial information or the tax information, and that's what I know. But just like we talked about, the profession has always changed. It is changing now to a larger business information set. Technology gives us that capability to measure and calculate different things. But what the marketplace, the regulatory community, and standards, because we're going to have international standards and sustainability and the like, what it's saying is that multi-stakeholders have different business information needs. The bank might have one thing, employees may have a different thing, you know, customers may have a different thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And regulators obviously are a part of that if you're in a regulated industry. And so the footprint isn't just financial, it's financial plus, and I'm doing a sort of an umbrella notion. Financial is a critical component, but there's other information sets. Intellectual property is a major information set. Environmental impact is human capital is a major element. Even relationships, how companies manage relationships. And so that's the notion of integrated thinking. And what flows from that is integrated information sets, including in sustainability or natural areas. And that's what's being demanded. And if you're a small business, it's going to be demanded by big businesses in your supply chain. Because you're where you sit in the supply chain, because they're going to have certain regulatory environments. And it really then is, we have to think about ourselves as being very critical players in that broader information set, including financial information, which is truly our dominion. But what happens in that broader information set is controls have to be built, measurement has to be done, internal decision-making and reporting occurs, and ultimately external, and ultimately assurance. All of those are our sweet spot. And it's just a question of whether we want to take our sweet spot and apply it to that broad set or not. And frankly, we didn't always have tax in our profession. It was brought into our profession. And now is the time of thinking about business information in a broader sense.
Love it. I'm always learning so much from you. Thank you so much, Barry. Do we have any questions before we close it out? No questions. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening in to On the Edge. Barry, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great being with you.